Director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Centre, sponsored by Small Church Connections. And this is us, Canadian Small Churches in Action. Our podcast today has the opportunity to, meet somebody that I've just met in this last little while. I'm going to let him explain who he is, what his ministry path has been, and then we're going to jump into all sorts of stuff. We like tangents. I've chatted with Robbie before, and I think this could be very interesting. So just tell us a little bit of who you are, what your ministry path has been, a little bit about yourself, just to get us started.
Yeah, hi. My name's Robbie. I am a pastor at a small church in Brantford, Ontario. I've always been a little bit of a little bit of a nerdy person. So
Join the rest of
when I
us.
kind of yeah, so when I entered into the ministry path, my love for like church history and the Bible and stuff has really kind of come forward in a lot of how I think about church, because I've always loved diving into some of that stuff. But I've been in ministry for just under a decade now. Kind of entered in when God really dramatically called me out of healthcare and into ministry. Started in children's ministry as an assistant, became the kids pastor, became the kids and youth pastor, and then the youth and outreach pastor, handling our like community outreach missions, that kind of stuff. And I'm now kind of filling the role of acting lead at our church.
Well, I think you mentioned that you also came out of healthcare. Um,
Yes.
how did that? Maybe just give us a little bit of that conversion, we'll call it, experience.
Yeah. Yeah. So, man, it was really interesting. So, like, I come from a healthcare family. My parents were both PSWs. My grandmother was a PSW. My mom is now a nurse. So, healthcare has always been a big part of our family. We were the family where we had like discussions about open wounds and bodily functions around the dinner table, and that was
Okay.
normal. Um, so when I was looking at career paths, I thought nursing was what I wanted to do. It kind of met that need to care for people, but also seemed like a well-respected and fairly lucrative career opportunity. So I became a PSW, and I was working in that field and had just applied for my bridging course to get my RPN. And I had been a Christian by that point for a couple of years. And something happened when I first became a Christian. Like one of the first experiences of like church for me was I was like 18. I got saved when reading the Bible, and a friend of mine invited me to his youth group. And I was like, okay, I'll go hang out with these teenagers and hear what they have to say about Jesus. But there was a missionary there who had been sent by this church. Him and his wife were serving in China, doing all sorts of cool things. Got to hear some of his stories. And then he came and he prayed over me. And I didn't have categories for this at the time, but he told me things about myself that no one in that room except me knew. And I realized, wow, like he's actually hearing from God on some of this stuff. There's a lot more to this than I thought. And then he was the first of many to tell me that God was calling me to lead his people, which I immediately had like a gut reaction against. I'm like, yeah, no, you've
Yeah.
got the wrong
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
Um, and so over those next few years, as I'm pursuing my kind of plan and career path, God is continuously calling me towards ministry. And like without even realizing it, I was stepping into that. My wife and I met doing theater. And so our response was to, well, you know what? We love theater and we love teenagers. So let's form a community theater for teenagers where we can protect them from the toxic stuff that sometimes comes with that and help them understand purpose and what it means to be created by God. And we can produce shows that are really dramatically good, but teach the truths of scripture. And so we kind of started that, and then out of that, Bible studies, and then we were basically running our own house church, although I didn't have categories for that at the time. So when God kind of like when God is like really pulling on me, you need to go into ministry, and it's becoming so clear and so weighty. I kind of have my what I call my Jonah moment, and I'm like,
Okay.
I'm gonna put in my application for my RPN bridging course because like I love you, Jesus. That's really cool. I don't want to do ministry. I want to do healthcare. That's been my plan my whole life. Once I realized I couldn't be Batman, and so then in that, I end up losing my job at a retirement home because I was 2.5 months in, and negligence on the side of one of my coworkers led to someone almost getting injured. So I injure myself stepping in to very improperly hold him up. It was a whole ordeal. And then the day I was coming in with WSIB papers, they dropped me like I'm hot. And I'm like, okay, God, I'm positive you didn't cause this, but I feel like you've been trying to get my attention for a while. If I'm ever going to say yes to you, you need to show me what you're calling me to. And that day I get a call from a woman who'd been praying for me for years before I became a Christian. She says, "Hey, there's this group at my church who are doing this online based Bible college program, and I think you would should check it out." And that kind of began my journey into finally saying, yes, Jesus, like I get it, you're calling me to this, I'm going to do this.
Well, okay, you brought up about a 57 different questions here. First, first one being a Batman calling. Boy, that's a real calling in itself. But I must admit that in talking with a number of pastors over the last few years, calling is a very important part of it. Feeling that the
Yeah.
sense that God's calling.
Yes. I mean, like I can think of at least a dozen times over my ministry career where I've gone home and I said, God, I can't do this, but you've called me to it, so you're gonna get me through it, and it's gonna be fine. Like if you don't have, I'm a firm believer. If you don't have the call, you're not gonna make it. Like
Well, okay, let's verge a little into your actual your ministry path now that you're in your church. You've talked a little bit about some of the things you've done. Well, let's start first with the church that you're currently in.
yes,
Give me a little bit of history background on the church itself. It goes back
yeah,
decades, well, a century, I
yeah,
guess. Yeah.
yeah. So this church has been around. In it, this church as an independent church has been around since the 80s,
Hmm.
but it goes back quite a while before that. It was actually, our church was originally a part of the United Church, and our founding pastor, when there was some clear cut compromises happening in the United Church. He felt convicted to leave, and the majority of his church felt the same. And so they established our church, which was at the time called New Covenant.
Hmm.
And within a few years of renting school gyms, gathering in community, preaching the word, doing all the stuff that makes church church. They had bought a piece of land and built what was our church home up until a few years ago, and that church over the years has, we've gone through some changes. uh, about 2017 we changed our name from New Covenant to Celebration Church, mostly because, well, as I'm sure you know, covenant is not exactly a common word in the
No, it's not.
non-Christian community anymore. Like, true fact, when I was working at a bookstore while working part-time at this church, when I told someone I went to New Covenant, they were like, convent, like witches? I was like, no, no, aka that's coven, not convent. Um, but it was quite clear that most people had no idea what New Covenant meant. So we changed our name to Celebration Church, and then, I mean, over the last few years, we've had a number of changes, which is, I think, something we're planning to talk about here today, right?
Yes. Shall
Yeah.
we jump? Shall we jump
Yeah.
into a number of
Yeah. You
those?
know what? Let's
Yeah,
let's
let's
jump
go
in
for it.
because I mean, I don't think it's a secret to anyone that COVID was a big change for pretty much
Mhm.
everyone in the world. Churches especially felt a lot of changing dynamics throughout COVID. But we decided we were gonna like step that challenge up a level and move buildings and take on a building project during
Sure.
COVID.
Why not?
Um, like it's one of those. It makes zero sense in the natural, but it was so clear. God wanted us to move into an embodied community because where our old building was, it was an amazing building. We were on a dead end street with a hotel, an insurance brokerage, and a Home Depot. So we were not getting a lot of passersby. On a Sunday morning, it's really hard to, try and wave people in who are driving into Home Depot because they're not looking to, hey, maybe I'll check out church for the first time in years. They're going to get their lumber and go home and work on their shed, right? So, so we had this building that was kind of sitting empty throughout most of the week because during COVID, we couldn't do a lot of ministries of our own. But then that caused us to think actually, we only use this a couple nights a week. Otherwise, it's just the office. We're in the middle of nowhere. We're not the ideal place for groups and clubs. We're not the ideal place for us to run outreach programs for people that we want to reach and we want to practically help. We're kind of in the middle of nowhere, which led us to really reflect like, well, does Jesus kind of sit off in the periphery and invite people to come to him, or does he kind of like walk up into the middle of the mess and go right to where the people are? And as we reflected on that and we prayed, and our board, our staff, and then eventually our congregation, we decided with an overwhelming majority, yes, we need to sell this building and we need to move into the densely populated part of town. So we live in Brantford, and we're now in West Brant, which is this beautiful hybrid of we're across the bridge from downtown, where we have a university and lots of students, as well as a lot of people struggling with homelessness and stuff like that. And then our neighborhood is what's called Old West Brant, where we have all sorts of families, young families, lower income families, and we're a 2-minute drive from the fastest growing part of town, where we have a lot of people moving in from the GTA. We have a lot of people who are new to the country moving in and getting established. And there's literally every time I drive past there's like some new subdivision being built. So we went from dead end to the middle of like the most densely populated part of our city. And I mean, the location was chosen intentionally. We came, and before we even presented it to the church, a team of people came and prayed through this place and said, God, is this where you're calling us? Is this where you want us to be? Because if it's not, we don't want to go here. If it is, we want to be nowhere else. Right?
Now
And
the building itself that you ended up in, tell us a little
yeah,
bit about that.
yeah. So like, uh, kind of much like our own church, which has this long-standing history, but it's changed forms over the time. We're in a building that was at one point a rope factory.
Mhm.
So years and years and years ago, there was a rope factory here in town, and now it's for ages just kind of sat as this large complex of empty brick industrial buildings. And this is a really cool side story. When we came to move in here, we were like, can we even get the zoning to have a church here? Well, one of the original developers who purchased this spot at some point along the line felt so strongly that there should be a center of worship here that he fought to make sure that that was included in the zoning.
Oh,
And
really?
so it's just been sitting there in the zoning already, that it was ready to go for a center of worship on this property for ages. So like God kind of lined that up way back when. Um, but yeah, so now we're here in the largest chunk of what was this old rope factory, and it's fun. You can still see as you come in. We've tried to keep a lot of the steel beams and the old exposed brick. We've added some more modern pieces because we got to cover some stuff up with drywall for safety, and but we have um, we have this scale when you first walk in,
Yeah,
and like
yeah.
all of the kids and youth love it. They'll like jump on it, and we'll tell them there's like a trap door under there, so don't jump too hard. But it's the old original scale that they would weigh their pallets of finished product on before they sent it out. But it looks so cool. It's such a cool like accent piece.
So here you've got pandemic. How
Yep.
did you how did you adjust to the pandemic? How what did you have to
My
do?
goodness. Yeah. So the pandemic was a wild ride. We
Mm.
wow. It's a funny story. We had our staff a staff like party type thing at a bowling alley a couple days before the announcements that they were going to be locking things down happened. And so we're all there bowling, and there's this giant jug of hand sanitizer, and we're all joking about how like, oh, if we had that giant jug of hand sanitizer, we could sell that and make a fortune. And it's all jokes at this point, but we're all kind of sitting going like, literally tomorrow they could announce that church as we know it has to change, and that's what happened. So we immediately had to flip everything we do. Up until that point, we had, online ministry had been a side thought. So we would record our message, and then hopefully by the end of the week it would be posted on YouTube, but it wasn't a very great video. um, and now we had to figure out how do we do this. We experimented with, like, hey, let's just put a phone with a Facebook live stream here and we'll do church like church, and we realized that doesn't work well. And we within a few weeks got really good at, okay, we're gonna preach to a camera and try and set it up like we're sitting in someone's living room and pretend that this camera is someone that we know, and which was so awkward, so awkward. I still am uncomfortable preaching to a camera. Like I have
I
to
can understand that. Yeah.
I have to like think about a couple of people within the congregation and imagine their face in that lens, right? But we started doing that and pre-recording all this stuff, and using the church online platform so that we could have community happening in the comments, and just interacting with one another, and flipping like our kids and youth ministry online, doing the same kind of thing, developing content, recording it, putting it out, and then finding places where we can connect and chat. Discord was a huge help, especially with our youth. I had no idea what Discord was up until that point, because despite how nerdy I am not a video gamer, and that was Discord's like main use at that time. But it became a place to do community with our young people. We had a lot of community groups start using Zoom to meet, and we started getting creative with like, hey, here's some suggestions on ways you can have meaningful prayer time on Zoom. Here's how you can facilitate good conversations over Zoom. Here's how you can here's how you can begin to maybe like break the ice, because it's so awkward meeting on Zoom if you're used to being in person. Like, here's how you can like break some ice, and some fun ways you can play a game to lighten the mood on Zoom and stuff. And tried to, on one hand, flip to do the Sunday morning experience online, but we found actually the easier part. It was the community, it was the relationships, because the like typical Sunday morning like worship and word, those could transition online pretty okay, and people could gather with their families and worship. But the most essential part that you're missing then from Sundays is the community. And then that had always been a part of who we were, but I think it was COVID that kind of showed us, actually, this isn't just a small piece of what we do. This is kind of the most important thing, is that actual interconnectedness within the body of Christ.
And I think you're getting to a large part of what I want to dig into with the church. You've done a transition in with COVID pandemic,
Yeah.
and all of a
Yeah.
sudden you're having to decide what is community. Then you decide that you're going to move, and
Yep.
that sort of changes. Talk about being embodied. Now you're in a new place, new,
Yep.
and this is sort of in the pandemic. Now you've got a third transition that happened, and having to deal with community and how you maintain community. Maybe you can just give a
Yeah.
little bit of a hint of what's happened and how things are
Yeah.
continuing.
Yes, we're about 6 months into. I kind of said earlier, I'm sort of like our acting lead right now. We had in the middle of all this building projects still not quite finished. We had a bit of a leadership crisis and
Mhm.
lost our lead and executive pastors on the same day.
Yeah.
In just in a way that kind of left some pain and hurt and doubt and questions for people. So we're about 6 months into this, and I mean, there's a grieving process.
Oh,
There's still
definitely.
wrestling. There's questions. There's people have all sorts of emotions around this. But what's really, I think, just such a powerful testimony of what God is doing here is we're still open. We're still
Yeah.
healthy and functioning. People are coming to know Jesus. We've been doing baptisms. We've seen new people join teams, new people join community groups, new people step up to open community groups. Our kids ministry has for several weeks hit like its record high numbers since pre-pandemic. Like God is doing things. People are coming. People are encountering Jesus. People are finding life and transformation here. And we've had some people leave, which is kind of, you anticipate
That's
stuff like
tough.
that.
Oh yeah.
Not to the number we would expect. And I love that most of those who have left, there's been conversation with either their community group leaders or myself or someone else, and they're leaving and connecting right into another church. They're not leaving the church, they're leaving our local expression, which that's fine. Like if you feel called to go and plug into another body, that's great. We're all one church, right? So it's just it's been shocking how present and clearly moving God's been through all of this, and I think that we're almost on a journey to being a healthier church now than we even had been before.
Hmm. Now, as you've moved into this, you could have chosen to be the new interim sort of person coming in, and we're going to put it all together. We're going to administrate this. We're going to program ourselves to death. We're going to get this thing going again just by making sure we're doing the things that need to be done. I think you took, as I've chatted with you, you took a different approach. Maybe you can explain a little bit of where you headed with that.
Yeah, yeah. So like, um, when all of this went down, I was so convicted that we have a number one priority, and that's our people.
Yeah.
Like we have hurting people. We have people who need to be loved and shepherded. We have people who need to be reminded of the goodness and faithfulness of God. We have people who need care. And that was the number one priority. And that meant that, we had to do things a little bit differently at some points. We prioritized our people to the point of, like under prioritizing some programs, dropping the stuff that was on the periphery for a little bit. It was the summer, so it worked. It's like, let's take a season of rest from some extra things and really just lean in on loving one another well. Let's create space for people to grieve and to process. We began having weekly prayer and worship nights, which were, I mean, to say that a prayer night for a church, our average Sunday morning attendance is somewhere between like 150 and 200 adults, and we had throughout the summer at our weekly prayer and worship nights between 25 and 50 people. Is like, that's a lot for a prayer meeting.
That is a lot for a prayer meeting. Yes.
And so, but we had people were coming to just be together, come before God together, and be authentic, right? And we started to lean into, what, let's focus on some more of the fellowship elements. Let's have a church potluck, which we hadn't done in as long as I've been at the church, because It's harder to programize a potluck sometimes. It's you have less control, and things can, and it can be less efficient, and you never know, someone's going to bring some food that gives someone a like anaphylactic reaction because they forgot to mention that it has peanuts in it and it shouldn't have peanuts in it, right? But people people were longing to just feel that connection and be seen and known, right? And so that is what we leaned so heavy into right off the bat. And where Christmas Eve is coming, we've got like all of these programs that are happening again. We've picked these things up. Putting things on rest doesn't mean dropping things. It just means prioritizing what's most important. And for our church, we realized that was our church, the people, not the programs, not the building, not any of that other stuff, but the people, because the people are the church.
So, okay, I'm unfortunately looking at a clock and saying, we're about out of time, and we've talked calling, we've talked community, we've talked transitions, and all sorts of things. I would just love, as a final thing here, just to ask you the question: if you had one piece of advice for small church pastors, small church leadership, what would that piece of advice be?
Community. I
Okay.
think, I think it's interesting that when we look at what our biggest need was throughout the crisis, it was connection. It was connecting people, helping them to be seen and known and heard and loved and discipled and cared for. That's the deepest need for like humanity. And actually right now, that's a very specific need in our culture, is connection. We are such an isolated culture. And it's a problem, but not a problem that most organizations are equipped to deal with. Right? Real connection, authentic connection, where you can be vulnerable, you can bring your hurts and your pains, you can come with the baggage that you bring. Most places and organizations and spaces, connection is built around very specific niches. Like you can go and be a part of a club or an organization, and you serve together, or you build model trains together. You talk about books, or you play certain games, but that's the extent of it. Whereas the church at its best is a family. It's the family of Christ, and we come in with all of our baggage, all of our hurts, all of our doubts, our traumas, our gifts, our joys, the things that we can bring to the table, and we meet each other where we're at. We share life in a meaningful way. We challenge each other, encourage each other. That's what culture is longing for. That's what the isolated individual wants, is to belong. So I think when we read Jesus say that the world will know that you are mine by how you love one another. When we read descriptions in the book of Acts of the church being the church and sharing everything they had and eating dinner together and worshiping together and praising God together, and people were being added to their number as they looked on, I don't think that's just a happenstance. It's not coincidence. I think it's cause and effect. Jesus told us, love one another well, live as family, be around the table. What unites us in Christ is greater than what divides us in anything else. And as we do that, as we lean into that, as we focus on that, then people who are hurting and isolated look in and they see that and they want that. And we then get the privilege of welcoming them in and explaining that what this is that they're seeing and experience is actually the love of Christ embodied in his people.
Okay, we're going to stop there because this has been great, and I would love to do more, but we'll stop at this point, and maybe at some later point we'll get another chance to chat. I have enjoyed this just so much. Thank you, Robbie.
Yes, thank you. I've enjoyed this. I'd love to come back sometime.
All right.